this is something that don't tread on me. I value my liberty. And I think they value their liberty just as much to say, fuck off, right? So this idea of coercion, you are now impeding on my liberty as a homeless person drugged out.
We don't care about their liberties.
So,
I don't care about it.
Then why should we care about yours?
No, listen. If you want this to truly be an issue of don't tread on me liberty, which again, I didn't really say I'm a libertarian conservative, but regardless, let's take it from that perspective. They don't have the property rights to be there, right? So the basic premise of kind of that libertarian philosophy is everything's based on property rights, a non-aggression principle, right? So by camping out illegally and not paying and, whatever it is, they don't have property. You're not saying you have to get off this street. Who owns the street? You could argue the public, the government, whatever. But, it's not within your liberty to go and camp in my yard. And I would say from the same perspective, it's not your liberty to go and take resources that belong to the public without, the public's consent and just say, I'm going to live here.
Welcome to another episode of Tacos and Shawarma with your hosts, Elle and Sebastian. Today we're here with Vince Dow, Gen Z conservative commentator. How are you today, Vince?
Good. Great to be here. I can handle California for a few days. It's nice, and then then I have to dodge homeless people trying to stab me, but we're alive, so it's all good.
You're from Cali, though,
I am
right?
from here. Yeah, I'm from the Valley.
Yeah, what part of the Valley?
Northridge area, basically. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, how old are you again?
20. I'm 20.
20.
Yeah.
How long were you in LA before you?
I grew up my whole life here. Yeah.
Yeah. And now you're in
Florida.
How's that?
Different.
Better?
Better.
Yeah.
Sure,
you like. I mean, I'm sure you're liking it because of the politics.
Right. But there's something about too. Just I live in an area that's a little bit more smaller, so things are just more laid back,
No
the
homeless
lifestyle
people.
here. There are homeless people downtown. Some things are the same, but the homeless people, you're not scared of the homeless people out there. You're not scared they're going to stab you. They're just annoying and they're like, hey, can I have money? But, out here, homeless people, it's like you have to be worried they're on, what's it called, PCP, and they're going to just go crazy, ramble on everyone.
They're a little aggressive.
Right. So it's a difference. It's a difference.
True story. The only place I've ever gotten my hands on PCP was in Philly.
Really?
Yeah, that's that.
I think they're on meth here.
That's
I don't know. Just drugs.
He doesn't do drugs. He doesn't look like he's.
No, I've never touched drugs.
Yeah, that's a good thing though.
Yeah.
Don't. Yeah.
I mean, I've smoked cigars before, but that's about the farthest I'll go.
That's good.
It's like,
since we talked about the homeless problem, right, and that's already something that's gotten come up in conversation.
Yeah,
Vince, how would you address the homeless problem in California?
So honestly, if I was thinking about this from the perspective of a Californian. There's a place
you are
out,
a Californian,
right? But I'm saying if I was like the governor or the mayor or whatever, I mean, we have a very big rural expanse in the desert, I would say, because it's not ideal either to just send them to the desert. I get it. But, Los Angeles is one of America's most iconic cities. And I think you just cannot have a situation where there's all these tweaked out, cracked out people just everywhere, and it's very dangerous. And I think it's a bad look for the state. It's a bad look for the country. So honestly, if I were governor of California from that perspective, I'd probably say, okay, since California is a very liberal state, they want to spend money on so much stuff to begin with. I'd say, okay, then let's build some type of huge homeless shelter town thing, and we can have rehab centers, all that stuff. And that's a problem with homeless shelters too. They're just like shelters, right? It needs to be rehab. You can't take drugs, all that stuff.
It needs to be locked.
Right. And
gated.
Something like that, something along those lines. And, I would probably just send them out to Mojave Desert out there and have them cause a little bit less problems here. That's probably what I would do with them.
Sorry to cut you off. You know what's crazy? I feel the same, like before you said that, but I feel like I feel the same way. Like we should put them somewhere else. Basically.
Yeah. Cause I mean, I understand it's a difficult question. What are you going to do with them? Right. But first and foremost, I don't know the exact ordinances these days, but it's very hard to go after people camping on the streets out here. The ordinances on them are not great. You have all these homeless rights groups, all that stuff. And I just say you got to get rid of that. You're not allowed to camp out in the city and around all these people. But if you want to take a Greyhound to our little thing in the desert, then we can figure out something there. That's probably what I would say.
So both of you guys brought up the same sort of solution, right?
Yeah.
And your perspective jot it out a little bit more from the perspective of a California governor, right?
Yeah.
From the justification that liberals love to spend money on this particular set of issues, right? They can justify it easier than conservatives can. How do you reconcile, though, that spend as a conservative, and how do you reconcile that belief that government is justified in intervening in this? I mean, conservatives are the small government party. So in your head, right, not from the perspective of a California liberal governor, but from the perspective of Vince Dow, conservative, how do you reconcile that? Like, how do you reconcile government intervention when you're the party of small government?
Well, I don't want to say I'm the party of small government. I think we're the party of limited government in the sense that, yes, we generally don't want, the government. Generally we think, okay, yeah, things should be left to the market. We don't want the government to be spending huge, exorbitant amount of money. But I don't have any particular principle on that regard where we can't ever use government to do something. I mean, in this case, it's like you have obviously a lot of homeless people. It's a huge problem.
We need it.
Governments do spend money on stuff. We have roads. We have, all these different public schools, everything like that. And so I wouldn't say it's a violation of my principles at all. I don't have any particular one thing about. I generally, yes, prefer that government not be involved in things if we can avoid it. But I'm not the type of libertarian conservative who's absolutely like, we can never touch government power. I do think if it's necessary to use government power, it's like. Yeah, I mean, and also I think even if you were to be a total libertarian about this, you could even justify it from the perspective that it's just not safe, right? Government does have a duty to protect people's safety and all that stuff. And also I would bring up that even if you want to talk about the money side of it, I think this problem is driving a lot of money out of Los Angeles, right? I mean, the property values are already high to begin with, but I'd have to imagine to some degree putting all these homeless people around has to drive that down. I'm sure a lot of businesses don't want to do business. I know a lot of people are leaving. I left, for instance. So it's driving money out of the state. It's driving business out of the state. And so I think, in some regards, you could make a case that cleaning up your city brings money into it. It's actually a positive investment. And so I don't think there's really any ideological opposition from my perspective.
I mean, there's a lot of urban development studies on that side, right? Like, let's talk about the disparity in economic growth between the Bay, San Francisco, Silicon Valley, and Los Angeles, right? Where did Los Angeles put its value in economic growth back in the 60s? And it was in a lot of labor jobs, right? It was in taking advantage of the labor market. Whereas the Silicon Valley has been putting a lot of their value in much more neck up jobs, right? Technical jobs. We're talking about a lot of things in tech, a lot of things in finance, right? We're talking a lot about neck up, but you're still facing the same problems in the Silicon Valley than you are here in Los Angeles, right? And in some cases, even worse. So although the Silicon Valley put in much more emphasis on much higher end jobs and developing their economic growth in more sustainable, more professional, white collar kind of positions, you still have that, disparity, right? You still have that gap between the homeless population and the wealthy group, right? So
I think up in Silicon Valley, yes, San Francisco and Oakland have a lot of homeless, but I don't know what particular part of Silicon Valley you're talking about. But when I go to Santa Clara and stuff, it's nice, it's wealthy. It's 45 or so minutes from San Francisco. That's where so I don't know if I would really make that comparison there.
You can say the same thing here. Beverly Hills.
I'm not even sure.
You don't really run into homeless people in Beverly Hills
the way you do. Yes, they're everywhere.
Not like
but it's still in LA County. I don't know the exact counties up there, but I'm pretty sure, right? San Francisco is
let's talk about land, let's talk about general area and population.
But I wouldn't even call Silicon Valley a part of San Francisco or that Bay metropolis.
The Bay. Yeah, it's
the Bay. But I would say, I don't know. Growing up, I've always seen Santa Clara as being kind of a San Jose. I would say it's more like the San Jose metro, which, you could argue they're all kind of one big city, but it's also, I don't know if I'd make the comparison because San Francisco is like the urban metropolis type of place. San Jose, Silicon Valley is more like the suburban, whatever. I don't know if I consider them the same place.
So
what are you? I just want to know. I'm sorry. What are you saying? I don't even know. What are you saying?
No, I'm asking.
What are you asking? I'm trying to figure out what you're asking. You're trying to make a justification of why we have homeless people?
I'm trying to figure out what Vince would propose as a solution, right? And with some of the major with some of the problems of that reconciliation, right? Of what it means to have certain government interventions, what it means to be spending a certain amount of money, like where you get from point A to point B, right? So that was my question. My question was, how would you do it? And you answered the question sufficiently.
Yeah.
I think that's a fantastic
solution. Answer. Would you agree with that solution?
Yeah. What do you think as a liberal? What's your solution then to the homeless problem?
My solution starts, far younger, right? Far sooner, and it does include a lot of things, right? Like right now we're talking about rehab as a solution, right? Instead of having them just live on the street, let's have them go through the proper channels, right? California has the Department of Rehabilitation. It happens to be a wonderful program. You can actually join a program within the Department of Rehabilitation, and the Department of Rehabilitation will pay for you to get your GED all the way to your PhD so long as you follow the program.
They're not following any program. They're not following any program.
One, there's a lack of education is that the resources exist, right?
Sure.
That's a major problem that we have with this state. Just in general, in terms of resources.
But I think the other problem is maybe this sounds bad, but there has to be some degree of coercion to it, because how many of these homeless people that are camping on the street tweaked out, first of all, do they want to be rehabilitated? Probably not.
No.
And then secondly, GED, do they even know what that is? Do they want that?
What are they going to do with it?
That is my issue, right? Is with the ideology of coercion, right? This is something that don't tread on me. I value my liberty. And I think they value their liberty just as much to say, fuck off, right? So this idea of coercion, you are now impeding on my liberty as a homeless person drugged out.
We don't care about their liberties.
So,
I don't care about
then why should we care about yours?
No, listen. If you want this to truly be an issue of don't tread on me liberty, which again, I didn't really say I'm a libertarian conservative, but regardless, let's take it from that perspective. They don't have the property rights to be there, right? So the basic premise of kind of that libertarian philosophy is everything's based on property rights, a non-aggression principle, right? So by camping out illegally and not paying and, whatever it is, they don't have property. You're not saying you have to get off this street. Who owns the street? You could argue the public, the government, whatever. But, it's not within your liberty to go and camp in my yard. And I would say from the same perspective, it's not your liberty to go and take resources that belong to the public without the public's consent and just say, I'm going to live here, right? So I don't think that telling homeless people to get off the street and go somewhere else or saying you're not allowed, you can go be somewhere, but you're not allowed to be here. I don't think that's anti-liberty at all. I think that's protecting the liberty of public. It's protecting the property rights of others. And, that's a big problem in California is they don't protect the property rights of others. I know if you're a tenant here trying to rent out, you're renting out from a landlord. The tenant's rights out here, quote unquote, it's very hard to actually evict someone. I don't know the exact process. I just know it's difficult. And so I would say that if you're going to take the liberty perspective, you have to recognize that it's an issue of property rights, and homeless people don't have property rights if they don't have property and they're on someone else's. So,
all right, I'm hiring him to be my lawyer.
Well, you're in marketing, correct?
Well, that's my major. Yeah. But
do you want to go into law?
No.
Yeah.
No. But I mean, I could. It's a backup option.
You would be good at it.
I want to do the political media thing. So this thing right here, right? That's more the path. But yeah,
commentating drives you.
Yeah.
And then you see yourself building an entire career around commentating.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could say I kind of have one right now.
You're good at it.
I don't.
She's a huge fan.
Yeah, I love you.
Appreciate it.
I think you're amazing.
I mean, I don't make like six figures off it right now, but not yet, exactly. Yeah. So it's,
he's
I'm
the
building
future.
That. Yeah.
He's the future.
Many have said this.
I agree with that. I think he's great.
What action do you take, right? That's as a commentator, are you driving just the conversation? And is that a justified action in your head where you're like, I'm comfortable with this. I'm comfortable with just driving the conversation. But do you actually go and do any advocacy or action yourself outside of your commentary?
I mean, I do political work, right? I've helped with some campaigns. I do that type of stuff. There's a lot of nonprofits that I'm, connected to. I'm about to, after this, go to a nonprofit here in Los Angeles. And so I am minimally, I guess, engaged in advocacy and politics. I wouldn't call it my full-time thing. But I do think that, and a lot of people always say this, like, you need to run for office, you need to go do but I think that driving conversation is actually an incredibly important thing, right? And everyone has their role. I kind of see us as all soldiers on a battlefield as a movement. And so just in the sense that in chess, for instance, you have your pawns, your bishops, or in warfare, you have your different classifications, different jobs. I think that the role of driving public conversation is very important. And I think that, I'm more than satisfied to hopefully one day say I'm the guy who drove the conversation. And, you look at the connections of a lot of political movements, to the media, right? Donald Trump would not have ever gotten elected president if it was not the media force around him. And also there were certain conservative commentators, specifically Ann Coulter, I guess, comes to mind, who doesn't like him anymore. But back in the day, right, there was these class of conservative commentators that you could really point to and say, that's a big reason Donald Trump got elected, for instance. And so I think that I think media is important. And I definitely think it's a important thing to do and important life mission. So,
and to what ends, though, right? That's the question that I have for you. We can all have commentation, like we can all commentate, right? But where is the solution, right? Where is it a matter of you commentate to the point where the appropriate people that you guys support are in office? We've seen them in office. We haven't seen many solutions. We haven't seen actually much progress in that sense, right?
I would argue I have not really seen a lot of my guys, quote unquote, in office. Who are
your guys? Let's go with that.
Well, I think that most of the Republican Party are pushovers. They're not really truly conservative, or they're neo-conservative, which, something I disagree with. And so there's a few Republicans out there where I look at and I'm like, you're solid, right? I'm like, success. But I would say probably about 80% of the House GOP, I'll vote for them, whatever it is, but I won't look at them. I'm like, that's my ideal politician. I'm so glad we have this, right? I think most of the Republican Party, at least on the national level, what they kind of do is try to hold the line in terms of just try to stop certain aspects of the national decline and, maybe pass a tax cut. But, I don't really ever... I'm not really ever really impressed with the things they do in most regards. And so I think a big part of my show and my content is, we need to demand better from the Republican Party. And I'm sure a lot of liberals think they need to demand better of their party. And so I think I would say I look at Washington right now. It's very corrupt. It's very stuck. I think we would agree on that, right?
Yeah, it's a mess.
Sure. So, in terms of trying to just get politicians out there that actually do something, I wouldn't look at it and say, I wouldn't blame myself, because I've been the one saying for a while, yeah, most of the politicians actually kind of suck. So, yeah.
And so have you always been conservative? Did this something develop at a very early age? Did you kind of come to this conclusion? What are your parents?
My mom just doesn't really care about politics. My dad's conservative. Yeah, my dad's Republican. But yeah, growing up, neither of them were that political. I never really had a political education from my parents, one way or the other. But in middle school, actually, I was sort of a left-wing populist. I was kind of like your Bill Maher, Tulsi Gabbard type. I actually supported Bernie Sanders when I was in 7th grade, but I was very anti-Hillary, right? So my whole thing has always been, I've always been anti-woke, quote unquote, anti-PC. I used to laugh at the feminists back in 2015, 2016 and watch those SJW compilations, all that stuff. But I guess maybe it's a product of just being in LA. I don't know. My first inclination of those instincts was not just to go say I'm a conservative. It was more so, oh, well, let's fix the left. Half of them are ridiculous. Let's try to build some type of, I don't know, working class coalition, whatever. And then, I guess over time, I just ended up just falling into the conservative camp. So really where it started was I genuinely used to believe that Bernie Sanders was standing up to the Democrat establishment. Like that was my big thing with him. And then when he just totally caved in 2016 and ended up endorsing Hillary, which in retrospect, and I'm like, were you surprised that happened? Of course not. But back then I was really gung-ho. I really thought he was speaking truth. I thought Hillary was massively corrupt, thought she could not be president. And when he kind of just caved to Hillary, I was disappointed with that. I was a little bit disillusioned, and ninth grade came around. I didn't really care much for politics, and then I remember at the end of ninth grade, Parkland happened, March for Our Lives happened. I started taking more interest in that stuff again, and then I sort of heard the arguments of the pro-gun side, anti-gun side. I realized the anti-gun side's a little bit ridiculous in my opinion, and started watching Tucker Carlson, and that's kind of at the start of 10th grade. That's when I started doing the commentary stuff, like, that grew into what it is now. So it was a pretty fast transformation, I would say, and I always had those slight, like, right-leaning instincts, even when I was on the left, you could say. And then, by the end of, like, ninth grade, I was like, I'm a conservative.
That's actually one of my biggest conversations with L, right? Is this like foundational difference? It's almost instinctual for a lot of people. Some people are going to be wired to just be leaning in one direction or another. In this country, anyways.
Although I have heard a lot of people on the right who have far bigger like walk away stories than me. Because mine is like, we can rationalize it. Hey, initially you thought this, but you've always had these instincts, and this is where you ended up. But I've heard people who are totally like, I was protesting for Black Lives Matter in 2020, and now I'm a big Trump conservative and stuff. And so
I can't buy that. I do not buy that kind of switch or swing.
It happens.
I don't think it does. I think that if you were at one point marching for Black Lives Matter and then going to a conservative perspective, you were foundationally always going to be conservative.
Not true.
Misunderstood in your own politics, misunderstood in your own rationalization, but rooted, right?
I mean, I get what you're saying, right? Yeah. Is that, they were just going with the crowd.
Yeah.
Sure, I get that. But there are some people who, I guess you're right. And most of the time that is what happens. But there are some people occasionally I've seen make very big ideological transformations in their lives. And, I guess one that comes to mind, I wouldn't even say he's fully conservative now, but someone like Dave Rubin, do you know who that is?
Yeah,
I mean, he was like progressive Young Turks back in the day, and then he kind of now is in our movement, I guess. It's stuff like that does happen, I think. It's just, but you're right. Most of the time.
Slight movement, slight change, maybe, yeah.
I guess.
And then ideologically speaking in this country, we're kind of all, no matter if you're on a Democrat side or Republican side, we're all very center in this country in general in terms of politics. You go to anywhere else in the world, there are some very vast differences between what they consider left and what they consider right. You talk to leftists in France who come here, they're like, our left doesn't exist in this country. There's just no mechanism for it to have room in the conversation in the US. It doesn't exist because relatively in the US, everyone's pretty much center.
I think
even on the further sides of both sides.
There are a lot of European countries though that come over here and say, or Europeans that come over and say our left on social issues is like insane. I think on economic issues, partially because our government's so divided, everything is sort of just in a standstill, right? But I think if you went and told some of the European leftists about our stance on things like abortion or some of these issues, transgenderism in kids, I think a lot of leftists across the world would kind of even look at that and be like, the guys are a little bit crazy on that front. I think socially we're one of the more divided countries. Our right is pretty right, and then our left is pretty left. But on economic issues, I guess I could see it.
And I still have to push back a little bit on that as well, right? I think a lot of these social issues, and this is where people in my circle will disagree with me, right? And I tend to be solutions focused, right? I really don't care where the solution's coming from as long as we have a solution and we can enact on it. But a lot of people in my circle who have divisive opinions.
Yeah.
On the social side, right? There's an undertone that I gather from these social sort of topics, right? Like this person that you kind of brought up right now, going from BLM to being conservative. They were rooted in conservative ideologies and foundation, right? That was that form of proselytizing was in them always in that manner. It is a in that regard, it was a conservative foundation that they had to begin with, right? So they weren't really, and I find this the same with a lot of like neoliberals or progressives, right, that go out and have a certain stance. The way that they go about communicating that stance, the way that they are so adamant on not listening to the other party is by far and large something that's in common that they share with their conservative counterparts. We are right. You are wrong. There is no conversation, right? I don't see that as being traditionally scoped in a liberal sense, a liberal progressive sense, the way that it was going back all the way to the FDR and the New Deal, right, was about conversation, compromise, getting to a point where we can move things forward, right? It was definitely a lot about listening, and that's just been removed from the conversation altogether. And that undertone across the United States as a whole is based in our roots in Protestantism. It is rooted in our sort of descendant ideologies from British imperialism, from even going back to feudalism, right? This idea of kind of having these thoughts, having this separation, me right, you wrong, kind of sort of situation. I think that is a big problem across the board, no matter where you are really politically.
Yeah, our country is
right?
very divided.
Yeah.
What I will say, it is true that liberals in this country used to be all about free speech, right? Berkeley free speech movement in the 1960s, even the 1990s, right? Bill Maher started off a lot of times. The reason he makes fun of liberals almost as much as conservatives now is because he always started off on like the anti-political correctness thing, and that used to be kind of a more liberal idea. What I would say about that and kind of a lot of people on both sides of the aisle ask this question: what happened to the left? The left used to be all about free speech, openness, all this stuff, and now it feels like they're so unwilling, like you said, to listen, very authoritarian in nature. I mean, the way as a conservative sort of rationalize that and see that is, I think, at least at the top, ordinary leftists, whatever, who knows, at least at the top, I think this has kind of always been the goal, right? Which was in the 1960s or so, when the social left was first starting to emerge, or you could say the 30s, whatever. I mean, it's a very conservative country, right? It's a very traditional country. The left did not have a lot of institutional power. I think initially they sort of used free speech as a tactic to kind of give themselves a seat at the table, right? Give themselves a platform and say, hey, listen, it's just our First Amendment. I mean, leave us alone, And then over time, that kind of normalizes itself. And I think now that we're in a country where the left has at least most of the cultural power nowadays, I think now you're kind of seeing the true intentions of them always come out the way they've always been. And obviously, I think you would disagree, and I'm not accusing you of that, but I think at the top, in terms of the leaders of the left, I think this has always been the goal. Once we have the power,
were they really left at all? Were they really left at all? Right? Historically speaking, the same hippies that were holding up signs became baby boomers, one of the most conservative generations that we've seen up until recently, where their children, echo boomers, are now more conservative than their parents. But were they really left at all?
The hippies?
The hippies, 60s? Right?
I think so, yeah.
They're the ones that became baby boomers.
But
foundationally speaking.
But I think you have to remember, there's a whole other side of the generation that was fighting the Vietnam War. In my opinion, I mean, my white grandfather on my dad's side, kind of that story. In my opinion, I tend to notice it's that generation that became the baby boomers, the people who were fighting the war, or at least, not on those campuses doing the crazy stuff. I think the boomers that were on the college campuses back in the day are kind of the institutional left now, because there's also a boomer left too, the older leftists that they go to all these protests and stuff. I think that I think the two sort of sides of that generation ended up in the places they are now, is what I would say. And sure, there's probably some people when they were much older had a realization, hey, that crazy stuff I was doing in college was kind of stupid. But I think that for the most part, you can trace back older leftists today to those college campuses, and the older Republican voters today to, in most cases, like the men who were fighting the Vietnam War and the people they married.
Well, we need a study.
It's very interesting, actually. Yeah, it'd be very
really
interesting
need
to study.
Yeah, because I think epistemology is everything, right? Mm-hmm. The root in how we develop our beliefs and knowledge.
Yeah,
everyone has some kind of epistemological root, right? Just like disease has an ontology, right? This country we need a political ontologist. Yeah. We need to get down to the root of the base of where things went wrong in the conversation. And I don't find in any of our conversations, right? Like when I ask about certain questions, or like when Elle and I get into certain conversations, I don't see any progress in the conversation, right?
Mhm.
And although I do find people who do commentary important to drive conversation, to what end? To what means, right? Like all we're doing is creating more divide,
Mhm.
right? All we're doing is creating more volatility. I mean, there's just in some groups, there's just the veracity in which they're just so angry.
We have
right?
to do it now because look what they did to us during COVID. If nobody says anything and nobody stands strong on things, then they're just gonna do what they want with us. So we have to.
At what point do we start driving a conversation to this country separating into smaller states?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not in favor of it, but you could make a case. There's sort of an inevitability to it, right? Even if not formally, informally, in the sense that I think the federal government, I mean, it's obviously been growing in power since FDR. It gets bigger and bigger. I think you might actually see a case, I don't know in terms of the size, but in just terms of its competency, it might actually start to get smaller in a sense that because the federal government's probably going to be in gridlock no matter who's the president, Republican, they can't get anything done, filibuster. And then you take a look at how many states in the next few decades, liberal states, are going to stand up to a Republican president, which they kind of did to Trump with the sanctuary city stuff and say, hey, well, no, I'm not following federal law. Republican states will probably end up in the end doing the same thing. And so, yeah, I mean, I think we're probably headed to that point. Obviously, our politics are very divided. I would argue one reason is just we don't seem to have a lot in common anymore, or just as a country. It's like, what does a liberal Californian share with a conservative person from Texas? Like,
right.
What do they really? It's a big country already, so it's hard to kind of merge those identities. And then it's just, what do they share in common? Are they really nowadays from the same country, right? And part of the thing with the United States is you can make a case. It was always sort of destined to become this way because when we were founded as a country, the state's identity was a big thing. It was more sort of just like a federation of states, right? And over time as a country, our identity has become more and more centralized. And obviously, really, when we won World War II, that was the big kind of the modern moment where we all were like kind of Americans, I would argue. But now that kind of the victories of the United States seem to decline. Maybe the Cold War, end of the Cold War is the last one. And now that the United States just grows farther and farther apart from each other in terms of culture, identity, all that stuff. I think you're kind of reaching the inevitability of the United States, which was this sort of post-war dream of the centralized American identity without something to sustain it that's very strong and very tight-knit. You end up seeing it just kind of split apart, right? And you really think about it, not a lot of countries on Earth, they're bigger countries than us. Not a lot of them have the population spread, though, and regional identities of us. Like, you look at Russia, it's a huge country, but most of the population, all Moscow, St. Petersburg, that one area, it's pretty small. China, even, it's all along the coast, right? Inland, there's not a lot of people. The U.S., we're so spread out that,
You're also talking about countries that have a very strong centralized cultural identity.
Sure. And also a very long, ancient civilization, too, which we don't have.
Right. And we don't have a uniting culture. One of the only things that we had in terms of uniting culture was we're patriots. Mm-hmm. We're the United States. Right. But even the idea of patriotism is starting to really kind of look like, where's that dream? It's not getting us anywhere. Everyone can get this ideology of like, I love my country. Mm-hmm. But like, I mean, are we really a united country? Not really at all. Right?
No, yeah. I mean,
so in this ideology, this sort of track, right?
Yeah.
I'm always talking about like a California secession. I would love a California secession.
Go ahead.
I'm like,
go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, and conservatives normally are like, do it, right? And I'm like, I don't understand like why we don't, because even that, like,
and look, we don't have to be at odds with each other. We'll have a free trade agreement. So
yeah, exactly. Right. Okay, so that
sure.
was where I was going to go into. In a world in which California secedes. And let's say Vince Dow becomes president of the Southeast United States region, right? Can we get along? Are we going to have trade agreements? Are we even if our politics are so divided? Are just like right now, the United States has kind of like a iffy stance on doing business with China because we're so politically divided, right? Are we going to face the same problems that when this country finally separates? Are we going to have a handshake deal, or are we doing business together?
I think money talks.
That's what I was gonna say. I think even between the United States and China, what is it really about?
Yeah.
It's about power more so than ideology to a large degree, right? So if that were hypothetical, I mean, we're just talking hypotheticals. I don't, who knows? But
are you for it?
If I were president of the Southeast, would I be pro doing trade with California? Yeah. I mean, we maintain amicable relations with Canada, with Europe and stuff. The main reason we're so mad at each other is because we have to live with each other, right? If we didn't have to live with each other, would it be really big? Oh yeah, they have a lot more pride marches than us, but it's okay, whatever. It's so I mean, in that hypothetical scenario, I think you'd probably find that it's just mutually beneficial to set up some trade agreement in the broken up United States. But I mean, who knows? Who knows how it would happen, if it would happen? It's kind of a hypothetical thought exercise. But I would be for it. Yeah, I would say. If we were to break up, which I'm not saying I even endorse that, but if we were to break up, I would be like, yeah, let's try to at least maintain the old economic agreement, because then everything would just be worse without it, right? So
what's the fear in endorsing that?
Well, I mean, there's a degree to which you still want to keep the country together, and then also, as easy as it sounds, you don't really know how it's going to go if you broke up as a country, right? Because and obviously a lot of people who live in like rural Republican states are all for that idea, but you have to imagine, okay, well, how's this economically going to work? Is your new country's currency going to be stable? What's what I mean? It can actually.
Well, I know how it's going to turn out for California. We'll be okay.
True, right? True. California, Texas, New York, right? You're okay on
solid,
your own, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, for a lot of just your smaller states in general,
they're not going to get Amazon packages.
Right. There's no.
I mean, what's the big problem with that, though? I mean, those are liberal companies from liberal states. Develop your own shit.
Listen, I don't know. I don't have the answer to that.
And if it was really up to me,
Amazon packages.
The secession would be Oregon, Washington, California, Nevada, Arizona, and Texas. That whole and New Mexico.
Well, that'd still be a pretty divided country.
Yeah, it would. But economically speaking, prime. We would just be solid.
Well, I think. But then what is even the point of that? Because Texas and California are going to have the same division.
Texas is starting to make its way into purple territory.
Sure, but it's still, for now at least, Republican state, I guess you would say. It's still, and I think that's kind of stalling a little bit. Beto came close, whatever. But fundamentally, I still, to an extent, want to see America survive, right? I still care about the country. And yes, if it's inevitability, we have to balkanize, then it is what it is. But I wouldn't say that it's a huge positive, right? Because I think there's just a lot of factors there that people don't consider. And then consider when we're all broken up as a country. I'm not saying it's not the 1900s where some foreign country is going to come in and invade, obviously. But who's to say that foreign countries don't start economically basically just coming over, taking over things,
That's a good point.
We've already been invaded.
And then we're already going to be struggling.
But if we're smaller, it's not the same, right?
What's your fear if you're on the right side, though?
I don't have any fear.
If you're in the right part of the secession, what's the fear there? Because really, we can't live together. Right? Like,
sure. Yeah.
There's and this goes for people who are also non-political. People who are non-political, they don't want to have anything to do with the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Well, I mean,
like, why keep trying for the only way that this works is if the rest of the country buys into either ideology. That's the only way this works.
I think that part of the reason I don't always just entertain this idea is I'm all like, you have to play the chessboard that's in front of you, right? You have to play the game that's right now. And right now we're still together as a country. And so the best thing I can say to do is let's try to figure this out. Let's try to run it as a country, right? Now, hypothetically, if we were to break up, then I would say, okay, then let's try to do the best thing forward from there. But there are a lot of, like, how would that come about? Would the federal government or other states or whatever let you leave or let so-and-so leave, Is Washington, D.C. going to sign off on losing California or Florida? Would they want to lose either state economically? You know what I mean? It's just so that's why I don't go out and say, like, we need this. I'm just, okay, hypothetically, yes, it's a strong possibility it will happen. I don't root for it. I don't really think about it. I'm just like, okay, well then hypothetically, yeah, I would answer your question. If it were to happen, I kind of have things in mind, but I just kind of approach politics right now from the perspective of, well, we're here. Let's figure out what to do. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
I agree. I like the immediacy in that.
Yeah.
Yeah, living in the moment.
Well, I think about the future too, but also it's like you have to take your current circumstances and then figure out where you're headed.
How far in the future are you really looking, though?
Explain,
I mean, because you just said right now, I look to the future. Like, well, how far out into the future is the future that you're thinking about?
But who's to say that the future entails breaking up as a country? I think the thing I brought up was a lot more realistic, which is there's never going to be a national divorce formally, but there's going to be an informal one where the federal government just grows very weak and divided in nature and the states take more autonomy. I think that's really where we're more realistic headed than actual balkanization, where, Yugoslavia and then... Which even on that front, you saw how Yugoslavia broke up. Maybe it might not go as cleanly as people think. Who knows, right? Who knows? Who's to say? So
and in this, where we have smaller federal government, larger state governments, where do you see yourself landing? Like, where do you see yourself staying in Florida?
It just depends where life takes me, career takes me. I definitely want to end up in a state that's kind of politically aligned with me for that reason, right? Because it's just, and some people give me crap for it sometimes. They say, well, you shouldn't leave your home, whatever, you're born here. But I really look at it like, well, it's not like my parents have been in California for several generations, right? Some's from the Northeast, some's immigrated, whatever. So I just look at it like I want the best place to raise my kids and kind of plant down roots, and understanding that this might be kind of a future reality of the country. I do think about that in mind. And so if it's not Florida, I want it to be somewhere that's a conservative bastion, I would say, yeah. So I do like Florida, though. I like it a lot there.
New York and California are out.
Most likely. Well, yeah.
You don't have to stay here just because you're from here.
I think there's something. Well, I know conservatives who still do, such as yourself.
Well, I'm not even from here. I'm from New York.
Okay. She is from 2 liberal states.
I didn't even know New York was liberal. I didn't even know I was into politics until Trump ran for president. I wasn't. I never even voted.
So
before.
you're just getting on the bandwagon.
I'm just getting on. But yeah.
We definitely need to have like more conversations in general, right? Mm-hmm. I think conversations are important. I think commentary is very important.
Yeah.
To what ends, I guess that's what the real debate can be about. Where is action actually being taken? But your position, I think, is well informed, right? Which is enjoyable because speaking to people who are well informed,
and he's young, he's amazing.
And when you
sounds so professional,
and when you have an opportunity to be in college,
my hoodie's very professional.
Yeah, science denier. Are you an actual science denier?
I mean, I guess yes and no. I mean, sometimes I genuinely like to just stand up and tell people I don't believe in evolution because it's funny.
Yeah,
I don't really have the reasons I don't believe in evolution. I'm just like, I don't. It's funny, Obviously, I do reject to a large degree the scientific industrial complex. It's really more so a matter of distrust. I kind of distrust things that are brought out and heard. I mean, I think fundamentally as an idea, I would say I believe in science. I believe in like the scientific process, right?
Do you believe in evolution? You think we came from monkeys?
Somewhere down the line we have.
Why do we still have monkeys then?
Different routes that they took.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. I'm not going to be getting into a conversation about biology and evolution.
No, I know. I wasn't trying to get into it. I was just curious.
Yeah, we don't need to. But I'm not even informed on it. I just like saying I don't believe in it because the reaction you get from the science heads is just like it's golden. So I just like to do it.
There are an incredible amount of research papers that I read from PRISM, which is scientific research papers published from the military complex.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like a lot of the stuff that I've read out on AI or like haptic technology, all military based.
But can I say something? I saw something today online that they said that you can't take any of that stuff seriously because it's who paid them to research it and what they're basically paying them to give the results they want it to be.
That's a problem with the United States, yeah.
That's why we still have homeless people because there's so much money going through the funnel of
you could kind of say that, I suppose. Yeah, the FDA is very bought out by corporate interests.
Yeah.
Again, I don't worship the free market. I don't worship limited government. I think we would agree on that. Yeah, we need to get in and rein. I don't know the exact solution to the issue. It's complicated from so many levels, but I don't trust the FDA. I mean, you look at the food in the United States. The food here is poisonous.
Yeah,
it's true.
It's full of microplastics, seed oil, all that stuff. I mean, you kind of know. So, and in other countries, right, the EU, for instance, which is not a country, but you know what I mean, their oversight board labels most of our chemicals, like common chemicals in our food. They're banned in Europe because they're considered carcinogens. They cause cancer. And here in this country, they're totally normal because, you know, lobbying interests, really. It's mix of corporations and certain people who wanted this stuff pushed and all that. But that's also kind of why I jokingly say I deny science, because that's what the science in our country says. Oh, it's safe to cook with canola oil. Microplastics in the food, that's no problem, you know? So, yeah.
I have this like ideal world in my head in which we all have our own little piece of land, which, you know, we grow our own food and, you know, we live off of the 10 by 10 piece of land that we have, and everybody has their own server. Like that is, if I could live in a future where we all have our own land and we all have our own server, I would be like computer server. I would be a very like happy person.
That's
content.
never gonna happen.
But
who's gonna build a computer server?
I mean, people need to get with understanding hardware and software technology.
You don't think people are gonna try to take over your land? Like it's still not gonna work.
At some point,
people are not like it's not gonna work.
That's all you hear from Elle is it's not going to work. Everything is no.
It wouldn't work though. It's, you know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's
it's been tried to some degree in some countries, you know, and it just ended up in you know, mass genocide basically. China, to an extent, kind of tried to do something. They didn't do exactly that, but they tried to do something like that. Pol Pot's Cambodia.
I mean,
you know?
But they would never give anyone their own server to control their own piece of real estate.
In Korea, they can't even have a phone.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. Like, I'm not talking about those countries. They don't give
that's
anybody
what
any access.
We're going to end up turning into if nobody says anything.
Are we turning into Korea or
not
China?
Not Korea, but
I guess in some ways yes, in some ways no. There's something a little bit different about the push in our country, which is it's all done in the name of democracy and, you know, liberalism, and so there's still some degree of. I think in those countries they more straight up tell you no, you don't have rights. In this country you're more gaslit about
like
it.
Manipulated.
It's you have rights, but no, you don't. But you know, hey, we're doing this, but hey, it's for democracy. We're gonna restrict free speech, but it's to protect democracy. Don't worry, you know. So this is a little different. There's a different dynamic. So you could say there's some similarities, but there's something very unique about the takeover of the West, which is, like I said, it's done in the name of democracy. And I don't know how often I've seen that done. Maybe like the French Revolution, sort of, kind of, you know, but it is very unique the way they do it here.
Last question before we wrap it up. Does democracy still exist?
I suppose. I mean, actually, I'll end with this. I don't really believe in democracy. That's what
Boom, mic drop.
Yeah. Do you think the elections are rigged? Do you think we'll ever be able to really vote for who we want?
Well, are you guys? Where do you guys post this podcast? Okay,
YouTube.
We're not allowed to say it.
Okay, shh. Oh. No, every election in U.S. history has never been fixed. Not even to some degree, and that includes even in New York City, Tammany Hall. No, those were all clean and fair too. That's what Susan Wojcicki told me. So. Yeah, elections, they're never rigged ever. At least, they're not. No.
Okay.
Fantastic. Yeah. All right. Well, I appreciate you. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
Appreciate it. Yeah, thanks for having me. It was
appreciated
fun.
your perspective.
Yeah.
I'm beyond thrilled because I've been watching him forever. He's so fucking smart and he's so young and he's like the future of the conservative media, I think. I think he's going to have like a huge career and I think you're like amazing.
I wish you the absolute best for sure.
You too.
Let's circle back around. I hope to talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. This has been another episode of Tacos and Shawarma with Al and Sebastian. We'll see you next week.
Yes.